Hi everybody, hope you're well. I did my pub quiz last night, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to get my puppy used to going out and being with other people. So I did. I took him with me, and I had no idea what he was going to be like. I mean, he's pretty chilled with people, but I had no idea what he was going to be like. And I put a little chair next to me so that he could sit on the chair next to me because I thought if he's sitting on my lap the whole time, it's just going to get very uncomfortable for us both. So yeah, I just put him on the chair with I had a pashmina, just put my pashmina there so he could spell my pashmina and just relax. And he went straight to sleep. He slept. We were there from about 7. Everybody made a massive fuss of him when they saw him because he just looks like a little ball of fluff and he's really cute. And everyone talked to us because we had the puppy with us. And yeah, he just slept from about, 7:15 until probably about 10:15, pretty much, apart from a little bit of fuss here and there. And I just thought, how brilliant is that? I can take my puppy out and he's very chilled and relaxed. My other dog, Cosmos, who I absolutely adored, who was gorgeous, was a very anxious chap. And there is no way that he would have stayed happy and content by me in a full pub full of people making lots of noise for that amount of time without actually getting quite, very sort of anxious and moving around and sort of starting to perhaps whinge and whine a bit. But Clemmy Bear was just completely chilled. So, oh, that was a result because I just thought, well, that's brilliant because I can take him anywhere really, and hopefully, he's going to be all right. So that was really good. Now, here I am. I've had a very busy morning. I was up this morning doing an interview for a national newspaper, an article for them. So that was quite interesting and it made me start thinking about things. And I've been preparing for it for the last couple of days. So I was kind of worrying over things in my mind. And it's funny, isn't it, how we kind of live our lives and how we compartmentalize events that have happened, traumatic things, dramatic things, exciting things, whatever they are, and we kind of put them into little boxes and package them away. There's a really brilliant book by William Boyd called Any Human Heart. And in the book, he says at the beginning, the character says, he's very old at the beginning and it goes back in time. And he says, I've been at least 5 people in my lifetime. And when I look back at my lifetime, I'm going to be 59 at the weekend. That's almost 6 decades. 6 decades. And I would say that out of those 6 decades, I've probably been maybe 4 different people. I've certainly changed and morphed into these different, very Lisa people. I mean, obviously me. But as time has gone by and as events have happened and unfolded in my life, I have definitely taken on board and learnt, I hope, from the stuff that's happened. And I've definitely grown and changed and morphed into the Lisa that I am now. And the Lisa I am now is probably the Lisa that I always should have been. So that may be a good thing. It's just taken an awfully long time to get here. I don't know if you feel like that about your life. You know, how long has it taken you to get to the point where you are now? And how do you feel about that? Do you feel comfortable in your skin? Do you feel like you are the person now that you always should have been? That you've grown into the you that you are? That you've grown into the John Smith or the Katie Smith or whatever it is? The person that you are now. Are you happy with yourself? I mean, happy is probably a bit of a trite and general word, but are you living your best life? And are you the person who, are you proud of who you are? Are you comfortable with who you are? Do you feel that you've got to a place in your life where you can look at yourself retrospectively or critically or positively or whatever it is and say, do you know what, Lisa, I'm okay with you. You're all right. You're a good person. You do your best. And yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with who you are. I think I'm kind of at that point. It's taken, as I said, almost 60 years. Almost 60 years. And I can't believe it's going to be Halloween tomorrow. Last night, as I was saying, I went to the pub quiz and the whole evening was themed on Halloween. And it was all horror movies and programs about scary themes that were on television or literature or whatever it was. And I realised that actually that's a part of that sort of genre generally, the kind of horror genre, is something I'm really not very comfortable with. I don't like it. I've avoided it. I think ever since Nightmare on Elm Street, which was probably in the 80s, I decided that it's not something I enjoy. And I couldn't watch that. And certainly since I've had children, I really don't like horror films. I do like things like The Shining and stuff. I don't know whether that's psychological horror or thriller, but I like Kubrick. I like his work, and obviously Nicholson and all that crowd. I think they're brilliant. I think it's a brilliant movie. But general horror films, you can count me out. So it was kind of like we came fourth. So I think luckily we weren't the only ones that didn't know very much about horror films and the kind of Halloween type of theme. But there we go. But yes, it was interesting. It was interesting. But I am going to digress. I'm going to move on and I'm going to look at some poetry now. I'm going to look at some Mary Oliver poems actually. And I know we have a large contingent from down under, from Australia and New Zealand. And I know that down there it's spring. Even though it's Halloween tomorrow, and I'm sure it's Halloween there tomorrow, All Hallows Eve, spring is in the air down there, whereas autumn and winter are sort of in the air up here. So I'm going to concentrate on a little bit of spring to start with, put a bit of spring in their step for the people that are down under, and read some Mary Oliver poems about spring. I'm just going to have my orange vitamin C, which I've been trying to take for my health. Okay, this is Mary Oliver. It's called Spring. All day the flicker has anticipated the lust of the season by shouting. He scouts up tree after tree, and at a certain place begins to cry out. My, in his black freckled vest, bay body with red trim and sudden chrome underwings, he is dapper. Of course somebody listening nearby hears him. She answers with a sound like hysterical laughter, and rushes out into the field where he is poised with an old phone pole, his head swinging, his wings opening and shutting in a kind of butterfly stroke. She can't resist. They touch, they flutter. How lightly together they accept the great task of carrying life forward. In the crown of an oak, they choose a small tree cave, which they enter with sudden quietness and modesty. And for a while the wind can be a knife or a hammer subsides. They listen to the thrushes. The sky is blue, or the rain falls with its spills of pearl. Around their wreath of darkness, the leaves of the world unfurl. That's lovely. I wonder what that's about. What do you think that poem is about? All day they flicker, has anticipated the lust of the season. By shouting, he scouts up tree after tree, and at a certain place begins to cry out. My, in this black freckled vest, bay body with red trim and sudden chrome underwings, he is dapper. Of course somebody listening nearby hears him. She answers with a sound like hysterical laughter and rushes out into the field where he is poised on an old phone pole, his head swinging, his wings opening and shutting in a kind of butterfly stroke. She can't resist. They touch, they flutter. How lightly altogether they accept the great task of carrying life forward. In the crown of an oak they choose a small tree cave, which they enter with sudden quietness and modesty, and for a while the wind that can be a knife or a hammer subsides. They listen to the thrushes. The sky's blue, or the rain falls with its spills of pearl. Around their wreath of darkness, the leaves of the world unfurl. I'm presuming that's about mating birds in spring. Must be really interesting how animals like birds, for instance, can just have this kind of very fleeting flapping around, and they barely know each other, I presume. They sort of meet like this on an old phone pole or something. They barely know each other. They don't have very much time together, and then they just decide to get on with it and reproduce all of a sudden. It's quite incredible, really, isn't it? Boom! Suddenly they reproduce, and out come some little baby chicks and little eggs at some point in not so distant future from when they do that. Nature is an incredible thing. It's miraculous, isn't it? Okay, I'm going to read another poem by Mary Oliver called Goldfinches. Some goldfinches were having a melodious argument at the edge of a puddle. The birds wanted to bathe, or perhaps just to dip their heads and look at themselves, and they were having trouble with who should be first, and so on. So they discussed it while I stood in the distance listening. Perhaps in Tibet, in the old holy places, they also have such fragile bells. Or are these birds really just that? Bells come to us, come to this road in America. Let us bow our heads and remember now how we used to do it. Say a prayer. Meanwhile, the birds bathe and splash and have a good time. Then they fly off, their dark wings opening from their bright yellow bodies, their teeny feet all washed, clasping the air. Interesting. Okay, I'm going to just choose Daisies. This is another poem by Mary Oliver. It is possible, I suppose, that sometime we will learn everything that there is to learn. What the world is, for example, and what it means. I think this as I am crossing from one field to another in summer, and the mockingbird is mocking me, as one who either knows enough already or knows enough to be perfectly content not knowing. Song being born of quest, he knows this. He must turn silent where he's suddenly assaulted with answers. Instead, hear his wild, caustic, tender warbling ceaselessly unanswered. At my feet, the white petalled daisies display the small suns of their centerpiece. There, if you don't mind me saying so, their hearts. Of course, I could be wrong. Perhaps their hearts are pale and narrow and hidden in the roots. What do I know but this? It is heaven itself, to take what is given, to see what is plain, what the sun lights up willingly, for example. I think this as I reach down, not to pick but merely to touch, the suitability of the field for the daisies, and the daisies for the field. I remember when I was young, I used to love lying in the grass, or sitting on the grass, cross-legged, of course. And usually there'd be loads of daisies on the lawn. I think that now we seem to get rid of daisies and wildflowers on lawns because we think they're weeds, and put down sort of these fertilizers and various things that kill the weeds. But in the old days when I was growing up, there were daisies everywhere. There'd be circles of daisies and there'd be clusters of daisies. And I'd always go and sit by the daisies in the grass, where there were the most daisies. And I used to love it in my lunch break at school, or if I was at home in the garden, just sit there quietly making daisy chains. And I used to make daisy crowns and daisy chains. And I'd always try and wear them back into the classroom, or make a little daisy chain bracelet. And they looked so beautiful to begin with, didn't they? They looked really beautiful. And then they would just suddenly go all wilty, and they'd wilt, and they'd look really sorry for themselves, and they'd be all kind of like limp, and there wouldn't be anything left of them by the end of the afternoon. It was usually sort of like a June day, and it was probably quite hot. And yes, I would really love doing that. It was one of my favourite things. I think it's a kind of meditative thing. It's something that gives you a sense of connection with the earth and a connection with stuff around you. And I used to love that. And the other thing I used to really love doing was pressing flowers. I used to love pressing flowers, and I used to love sort of making perfume from flowers. I used to get a jam jar and go around and pick lots of rose petals, or find sweet smelling flowers around the garden and stick them into the jam jar and fill it up with water and give it a good shake. And then I would leave it to sort of fester somewhere on a shelf. And I'd always be really upset when I never made sort of proper perfume. It would always turn into this kind of like brown, horrible glucky stuff with mould growing on the top of it, and all of the petals would be mushy and horrible. And I could never understand why I couldn't just make perfume. It was incredibly upsetting, I have to say. But yes, those were the days. Really lovely memories, actually, those memories in the garden. Very simple things before the internet. Oh, here we go, Fireflies. Mary Oliver. At Blackwater, fireflies are not even a dime a dozen, they are free. And each floats and turns among the branches of the oaks and the swamp azaleas looking for another. As who doesn't? Oh, blessings, oh, the intimacy inside fruition, be it foxes or the fireflies or the dampness inside the petals of 1,000 flowers. Though Eden is lost, its loveliness remains in the heart of the imagination. He would take her in a boat over the dark water. She would take him to an island she knows, where the blue flag grows wild and the grass is deep, where the birds perch together, feather to feather, on the bough, and the fireflies, blinking their little lights, hurry toward one another, and the world continues, God willing. I remember when my oldest friend, she came to America, she came to New York, and she was getting married. And she was getting married to an American chap, and they were both living in England at the time. And she already had a son from a previous marriage. And she came to New York, and we drove up to Vermont. We drove up to the Green Mountains, and we went to stay in this beautiful old farmhouse on the side of this mountain. And the farmhouse was from the sort of 18th century, it was 1700 and something, really, really old and really wonky. It was clapboard, and all the floors were kind of wonky like that. And the floorboards were so wide. I mean, the wood that the trees they must have cut down to make that house back in the sort of mid 18th century were huge. And it was really lovely because the house had not been touched. It had been in the same family. It was their sort of summer house, and it had been in the same family for generations. So it had a really oldie worldy feel about it. Lovely kind of cloth rugs, old rocking chairs, straw hats on the wall. I mean, it was just how you would imagine a picture perfect holiday cottage in Vermont to be, that had been loved and cherished, but only just enough, and modernised only just enough. And everything in it was obviously sort of loved very much by the family that had owned it for generations. And we went there, and they decided they were going to get married there at this house. And so we got the local person who could do the ceremony to come to the house. And in the garden of this house, which was very overgrown, all of the grass was above your knee, and it was all beautiful. There were wild peonies everywhere, pale pink peonies everywhere. There was a natural little lake, which was a big pond really, which was fed by natural springs, little dugout canoes on the edges, and it was surrounded by trees, kind of skirted with trees. But the thing that was so beautiful were these pink peonies, and they were it was like the most gorgeous scene, because you'd look out in this field of tall grass, which was green and golden, and some of it was sort of going to seed, and then there would be these peonies bobbing around in at the same sort of height as the grass, and loads of hummingbirds. And it was the first time that I'd seen hummingbirds. And I can remember washing up at the window and looking out, and there were these hummingbirds. They were going into the campsis, the sort of campsis flowers, which are like sort of little tubers. And they were going in and they were getting the nectar from the flowers. And I just remember thinking, is this some kind of fairyland? This is just too beautiful for words. But the thing that was really magical, and you may think I've gone off piste here, but the thing that was really magical about that farmhouse on the mountain in the Green Mountains in Vermont were the fireflies. So if you can imagine at dusk, just thousands, I mean millions of thousands of fireflies dancing around on that tall grass, on the tips of the tall grass and the pink peonies, just lighting things up, absolutely magical. And then this lovely fresh spring water little pond, reflecting the sort of, twilight and the view over the rest of the mountains. It was just absolutely magical. So my friend had her wedding ceremony there, and it was just us, my ex-husband, myself, my son, her son, and her now ex-husband, and it was just us, and it was so beautiful. And I made the cake, and I picked the flowers from the garden that she had as a kind of bouquet. There were also loads and loads of ferns as well. There were these lovely ferns everywhere. And I kind of decorated the house with these ferns and grasses and the peonies, pink peonies. And it was so natural and so beautiful. You couldn't have purchased anything more beautiful. It was absolutely spectacular. And there are times like that. I mean, I wish I had photographs of that. It was before we had digital cameras. But it was, things like that when I think back and the memories of that. I mean, it was stunning. And we don't really have many fireflies here. I hardly ever see them in the UK. But I remember in the US in sort of June and July, just there would be loads of them everywhere. They would just, suddenly this little light would come on and just, they'd flit around. And they were like little fairy lanterns, absolutely gorgeous. That was a really strong memory. So I'm going to read The Fireflies again by Mary Oliver. At Blackwater, fireflies, and not even a dime a dozen, they are free. And each floats and turns among the branches of the oaks and the swamp azaleas looking for another. As who doesn't? Oh, blessings. Oh, on the intimacy inside fruition. Be it foxes or the fireflies, or the dampness inside the petals of 1,000 flowers. Though Eden is lost, its loveliness remains in the heart of the imagination. He would take her in a boat over the dark water. She would take him to an island she knows, where the blue flag grows wild and the grass is deep, where birds perch together, feather to feather, on the bough, and the fireflies, blinking their little lights, hurry towards one another, and the world continues, God willing. God willing. It's very simple, but it's very beautiful, isn't it? I think it's very beautiful. Okay, now I'm going to read. Oh, sorry, I've got an itchy nose. Oh, I think when you have an itchy nose, and we say that if you have an itchy nose, it means someone's talking about you or something. Old wives' tale, I think. Song for Autumn, Mary Oliver. In the deep fall, don't you imagine the leaves think how comfortable it will be to touch the earth instead of the nothingness of air and the endless freshets of wind? And don't you think the trees themselves, especially those with mossy warm caves, begin to think of the birds that will come, 6, a dozen, to sleep inside their bodies? And don't you hear the goldenrod whispering goodbye? And the everlasting being crowned with the first tuffets of snow. The pond vanishes, and the white field over which the fox runs so quickly brings out its blue shadows, and the wind pumps its bellows, and at evening especially the piled firewood shifts a little, longing to be on its way. In the deep fall, don't you imagine the leaves think how comfortable it will be to touch the earth instead of the nothingness of air and the endless freshets of wind? And don't you think the trees themselves, especially those with mossy warm caves, begin to think of the birds that will come, 6 a dozen, to sleep inside their bodies? And don't you hear the goldenrod whispering goodbye, the everlasting being crowned with the first tuffets of snow? The pond vanishes, and the white field over which the fox runs so quickly brings out its blue shadows, and the wind pumps its bellows, and at evening especially the piled firewood shifts a little, longing to be on its way. I have to say, that's something I love about autumn in this country. I love getting my firewood in the summer, and I love piling up my basket with firewood and kindling and little firelighters. I always buy these little natural firelighters, which are made from they look like bits of sort of hay or something. And I love stoking my fire, and I love making my fire, and I love lighting my fire. it's a kind of ritual that I've come to really enjoy in the autumn and winter. And I really miss it in the summer when we don't have a fire. But yeah, I've started doing it again, which is really lovely. So right, let's have a look at the comments and see what you guys are thinking you're going to be doing today. It's all getting very exciting, isn't it? It's Wednesday today, isn't it? So yeah, middle of the week. Clarence says, hey Clarence. Leanne gives me a big smile. Sandra says she's obviously 81, so happy birthday to Sandra. Lyndon says hello from Perth. Shez says she did that too. Gotta go later, so that's my friend Shez. And Barbara says yes. So yeah, lovely to see you guys, and I hope that you're all having a great day. And I am going to get going, and I am going to carry on with my day. I'm going to take my little dog for a walk. My son's coming back. He's been up to see his sister in London, and tonight we're going to have a lovely supper together. So yeah, that's what I'm going to be doing today. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll speak to you soon. Lots and lots of love. Bye bye. Oh, I know, I was going to ask you before I go, do you have any ideas about poems that you'd like me to read? And perhaps we can do a little kind of like focus on those for you. And we can have a little chat and discussion about that. That would be really cool. Do let me know. Lots of love. Bye bye.